Do you remember that place where you always grabbed a thick slice of deep pan pizza after school, or those roadside diners where you stopped during family trips for beans, chips, and a lukewarm cup of tea? In this video, I'll take you through 10 iconic British fast food chains that have disappeared and what their disappearance tells us about how our food, our towns, and even our daily lives have changed. So if you ever miss the taste of a bender in a bun or those strangely comforting red leather booths, make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we take a stroll down memory lane. Let's begin with a pizza place that many of us still miss to this day. There was a time in Britain when going out for pizza felt like something straight out of a travel brochure, and at the center of that era was Pizza Land, one of the first chains to bring the Italian classic to the high street. Founded in 1970, Pizza Land served thin crusts, bubbling mozzarella, and tomato sauce that, while not truly Neapolitan, worked perfectly for British taste buds at the time. The restaurants had a warm decor that gave a real family feel, and Pizza Land became known for its tasty pizza, garlic bread, and the famous bottomless carafe of cola, which made it a popular choice for birthdays, first dates, or just a casual night out. At its height, the chain had more than 140 locations across the UK, but by the 1990s, it started to lose its place. Bigger American-style chains, rising property prices, and changing customer habits slowly pushed Pizza Land out of the picture, and by 1996, most of its branches had either closed or been taken over by rivals like Pizza Hut. If you grew up in the late 1980s or early 1990s, chances are Deep Pan Pizza Co. was your go-to spot for a cheesy, filling feast. With its famous all-you-can-eat buffet and slices thicker than your school textbooks, Deep Pan Pizza wasn't just a restaurant, it became a true British favorite for birthday parties, family meals, and those messy but unforgettable teenage hangouts. Its main attraction was the heavy, deep pan pizza that left you full every time. The restaurants were warm, friendly, and usually found in town centers or inside shopping precincts, with a style that was less polished than Pizza Hut, but felt more down-to-earth, making it especially popular with the working class. By the mid-1990s, however, dining trends shifted toward thinner crusts, fancier toppings, and more modern styles, which hurt Deep Pan's classic formula. By 1998, the chain disappeared almost overnight as its parent company moved on to newer concepts, leaving the last few branches to quietly close. Today, the words Deep Pan might remind you of frozen supermarket pizza, but for many, it brings back memories of when pizza was something you sat down to enjoy, often with a napkin tucked into your collar. Long before motorway service stations were filled with Starbucks and Pret, there was Happy Eater, the cheerful roadside diner that brightened countless British road trips in the 1970s and 80s. With its bright red signs and smiling cartoon face, it became a beacon for families wanting to stretch their legs and enjoy a warm meal. Happy Eater wasn't about fast food in the American sense, it was about comfort sausages and chips, beans on toast, a pot of tea, and a jam sponge for dessert. It was the kind of food your mum might cook on a weekday evening. Served in cozy booths with plastic trays and paper menus, kids loved it. And not just for the food, but also for the outdoor play areas with climbing frames that became a highlight of the stop. But by the 1990s, competition grew tougher. Trust House Forte, the company that owned both Happy Eater and Little Chef, decided to merge the brands, and by the mid-90s Happy Eater had been phased out completely, its signs replaced, and its unique identity lost. Even so, the name still brings a smile, a truly happy one to those who remember it. Speaking of Happy Eater, among all the names on this list, Little Chef may be the most legendary. Founded in 1958, it was more than just a restaurant chain, it was a true British institution for decades. Its chubby red-cheeked mascot welcomed travelers on dual carriageways and motorways, promising a hot breakfast and a clean stop along the way. By the 1970s and 80s, visiting a Little Chef became part of the journey itself. Families would step out of the car after long hours on the road, drawn in by the smell of frying bacon and the promise of the famous Olympic breakfast, a giant plate stacked with eggs, beans, toast, mushrooms, hash browns and sausages. Children sipped orange squash while parents settled for lukewarm coffee and a few moments of peace. But as the years passed, the pace of life grew faster. Global fast food chains offered quicker service and more modern menus, and while Little Chef tried to keep up with roadside partnerships, new logos and updated dishes, it just couldn't compete. By 2018, after 60 years of feeding travelers, the final Little Chef branch closed its doors, marking the end of an era. If you were a teenager or in your 20s during the 1980s or early 90s, Fatty Arbuckle's was the place to be when you were hungry and wanted the feel of a real American diner, even if you had never stepped outside the UK. Inspired by silent film star Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, the chain served up giant burgers, curly fries, and milkshakes that came in glasses almost as big as your head. Launched in 1983 in Plymouth, it quickly spread across the country, offering an all-American dining experience with jukeboxes, neon lights, and oversized portions. Families celebrated birthdays there, couples went on casual dates, and groups of teenagers crowded around plates of nachos, trying to feel grown up. But by the late 1990s, Fatty Arbuckle's began to lose its charm. Health trends made the word fatty in its name sound less fun and more unappealing. And while the chain rebranded simply as Arbuckle's, the magic never fully returned. By the early 2000s, most locations had either closed or been sold off, fading almost as quickly as they had appeared. Still, for many, it was the first place they tasted onion rings or shared a thick strawberry milkshake with friends. A memory filled with ketchup, laughter, and a sense of being young and free. Before jacket potatoes became trendy, topped with things like sour cream and avocado, Spuddy-like made them a hearty and affordable meal for everyone, baked until fluffy, split open, and piled high with fillings like cheese and beans, tuna mayo, or even coleslaw. These potatoes were comfort food at its best. For many growing up in the 1970s or 1980s, Spuddy-like was a shopping trip essential. Founded in 1974, the chain expanded quickly across the UK, especially in shopping centres and busy high streets. The food was simple, filling, and the experience was casual. Sitting down with a foil-wrapped potato and a plastic fork after a long afternoon of errands felt like a small reward. But as dining habits changed, Spuddy-like started to feel outdated, while newer chains with gourmet and modern styles began to dominate food courts. In 2019, the company went into administration, and most of its locations closed soon after. Still, the name brings back memories of simpler times, and perhaps your first moment of realizing that, yes, a potato really could be a full meal. For many visitors to London, and even for Brits taking a trip to the capital, a meal at Garfunkel's was almost a rite of passage. Starting in the 1970s, Garfunkel's offered a curious mix of vaguely American, broadly European, and comfortably British food that made it appealing to just about everyone. The menu was packed with choices: rotisserie chicken, burgers, lasagna, steak, and kidney pie, and even prawn cocktails, all under one roof. It wasn't fine dining, but it wasn't fast food either. It was the kind of place where you could sit down after a West End matinee or before catching a train out of town. Garfunkel's felt reliable, the sort of spot your parents might choose for a birthday dinner, or where a school trip could end with a celebratory meal. For decades, it held its ground in prime tourist areas like Trafalgar Square and Oxford Street, but as modern chains expanded and independent bistros thrived, Garfunkel's slowly lost its place. By 2020, after decades of service, its last restaurants quietly closed their doors, marking the end of another familiar name on the high street. 8. Back in the 1990s, it felt like there was a Benji's in the heart of every busy UK city. It was a simple but much-loved takeaway sandwich shop, known for its quick service, low prices, and unbeatable value. Founded in 1989, Benji's thrived during the rise of convenience culture, serving sandwiches, jacket potatoes, hot soups, and snacks that were always ready at the counter. It quickly became part of everyday urban life. Many remember their cheap meal deals, a sandwich, a drink, and a snack for under 2 pills, or the way the shop always carried the smell of toasties and baked beans. What made Benji's special was its straightforward approach. There were no fancy baguettes or artisan sourdoughs, just hearty fillings packed into bread that did the job. For many, it marked the first taste of working city life. Grabbing lunch, hurrying back to the desk before the phone rang. But by the mid-2000s, shifting tastes and growing competition from chains like Pret-a-Manger and Eat left Benji's behind. The company collapsed into administration around 2006, and by 2007, most outlets had disappeared. Still, for an entire generation, Benji's wasn't just a sandwich shop, it was 5 days a week of lunch, wrapped in cling film and nostalgia. Back when train stations still had that gritty charm and a real sense of occasion, there was one burger spot many remember fondly: Casey Jones Burgers. Found inside British rail stations across the UK during the 1980s, Casey Jones became part of the travel experience for an entire generation. Long before station cafes were taken over by Pret or Burger King, this was the place to grab a hot meal and escape the noise of the platforms. Run by Traveller's Fare, the catering arm of British Rail, Casey Jones offered simple fast food like burgers, fries, milkshakes, and the occasional hot dog. Kids loved the railway theme, while adults appreciated the reliability of getting a hot burger before a late-night train or during a long connection. The name itself was inspired by the American railroad folk hero Casey Jones, and the branding carried that spirit of movement and adventure. But as the 1990s arrived, British Rail began modernizing and franchising its stations. Slowly, Casey Jones locations were replaced by larger global chains, and before long the last of them had disappeared without much notice. The last chain we have is the legendary Burney Inn. While not a typical fast food spot, it was one of the most beloved names in British dining, especially through the 1960s and 70s. Burney Inns first opened in the 1950s and brought a new kind of restaurant experience to working-class families. For many, a meal at the Burney wasn't just dinner. It was an occasion. Anniversaries, birthdays, or that rare evening out all felt special when spent there. The atmosphere was distinct: dark wood panels, low lighting, staff in waistcoats, and menus that hardly ever changed. But that consistency was part of the charm. You knew exactly what you were going to get, and it always delivered. Families came to love the reliable set of dishes, often including the slightly overcooked steak that in its own way became iconic. What really set Burney Inn apart was how it made dining out feel like stepping into another world, without ever straying far from home. By the 1990s, though, British tastes were shifting. Pub chains began modernizing, and slowly the Burney Inns were phased out, many turning into beefeaters or other pub-style restaurants.